The Kellian Empire had ruled the Orion Arm with unmatched dominance for over 300 years. At the heart of their domain was Chios Prime, a world of gleaming crystal towers and gravity-warping architecture that reflected both their technological mastery and their immense pride. Surrounding this homeworld was a network of 37 colonized star systems, each interconnected and fortified under a single unified defense matrix known across the galaxy as the Barrier. The Barrier was more than just a defense system. It was a statement, an invisible web of quantum sensors, gravimetric mines, and autonomous kill platforms that extended outward like the nervous system of a god. It was designed to detect, trap, and destroy any foreign object that dared cross into Kellian space. For over 2 centuries, no enemy vessel had made it through. None had even gotten close. The Krillians were a species obsessed with perfection. Towering, lean, and reptilian in form, their iridescent scales shimmered beneath alien suns. Their 6-fingered hands were precise instruments of science and warfare, capable of engineering devices and starships other civilizations could only dream of. From their ruling chambers to their war councils, they spoke of themselves not only as guardians of peace, but as the final authority in any galactic matter. Their Grand Admiral Vextor embodied this arrogance. Charismatic and ruthlessly intelligent, he boasted regularly that the Krillian Empire stood eternal. He reminded his generals and diplomats that no foreign incursion had reached even the first perimeter of the Barrier in over 200 years. He believed it was unbreakable. He believed the Krillian Empire was invincible. The galaxy had tested them. 70 years ago, the Axon tried to brute force their way through with a massive battle fleet, only to be vaporized before even crossing the outermost sensor line. 30 years later, the Vespid Collective deployed advanced stealth craft, shielded with cloaking fields and radiation masking. They too were detected within minutes, their ships eliminated before they could even send a distress signal. Dozens of minor empires had sent scouts or exploratory vessels into Krillian space. All of them disappeared without trace. The Barrier didn't just destroy threats, it erased them. Over time, even the most aggressive species learned to steer clear of the Krillian border. None dared challenge them again. None until humanity. Humanity was not old by galactic standards. Barely a century into spaceflight, humans were still considered unpredictable, impulsive, and unsophisticated by more ancient empires. The Krillians dismissed them entirely. They saw Earth as a developing world with scattered colonies, inconsistent leadership, and unreliable diplomacy. They were not wrong at first. Humanity was fractured, its nations competitive, its technologies disjointed. But that changed with Talos IY. Talos IY was a lush, resource-rich planet, seemingly unclaimed and ideal for expansion. A human expedition established a colony there without knowledge of its Krillian designation. It was a mistake born of ignorance, not malice. The Krillians responded with fury. Without a word of warning, they dispatched a strike force that annihilated the colony from orbit. Not content, they destroyed 3 additional human outposts nearby, citing trespass and punitive example. The message was clear. No one entered Krillian space, not without consequences. What the Krillians didn't anticipate was the response. For the first time in living memory, Earth unified. Governments set aside old rivalries. A single banner, a single goal, survival. The United Earth Fleet was born, and though they were hopelessly behind in technology, humans had an edge the Krillians lacked: adaptability. While the Krillians clung to tradition, humans learned from every failure. They scavenged Krillian wrecks, decrypted partial codes, reverse-engineered damaged systems. Every skirmish became a research opportunity, and slowly humans began to close the gap. But the war was brutal. The Krillians had centuries of experience. They struck hard, systematically erasing human colonies and outposts, forcing the Earth fleet into defensive pockets. Many believed it was only a matter of time before humanity was pushed back to its home system, or worse, wiped out entirely. Yet even in desperation, humans did not surrender. Instead, they built something new, something no one expected. A vessel not designed for traditional warfare, but for infiltration and sabotage. A prototype forged in secrecy, combining human innovation with stolen Krillian principles. They called it the Phantom. The Phantom was sleek, silent, and deadly. Its hull absorbed radar and gravitational signatures. Its engines distorted mass readings, making it appear lighter than a lifeboat. It could phase partially out of normal space, slipping through the cracks of sensor nets. It had no standing army, no fighter bays, no brute force. It was a dagger meant to pierce the heart of a sleeping giant. The mission was simple in theory: penetrate the barrier, reach the Krillian command hub on Keos Prime, and deliver a quantum virus that would dismantle the Empire's central defense network. In practice, it was madness, a suicide run. No one had ever breached the barrier, not once, not even close. But humanity had no choice. They were out of time, out of colonies, and out of space. The Phantom launched in silence, vanishing from friendly radar, slipping into the black. Its crew knew the odds. They knew they might not return, yet still they went, not out of glory or vengeance, but because someone had to try. The fate of their species depended on it. The Krillians never saw it coming. And as the Phantom approached the first layer of their precious barrier, the galaxy was about to learn something the Krillians had forgotten. The most dangerous enemy is the one with nothing left to lose. Humanity had never intended to go to war with the Krillian Empire, but intention had little place in the brutal mechanics of interstellar politics. What began as a simple colony initiative soon spiraled into a catastrophic conflict that spanned decades and scorched entire star systems. It started with the settlement of Talos Gaufoi, a lush, resource-rich world found by human explorers during their ongoing expansion into deep space. They believed it was unclaimed. They had no idea it lay within a sector the Krillians considered sacred territory. The response was immediate and violent. Within hours of detection, the Krillians dispatched a battle fleet, not to negotiate, not to warn, but to destroy. Talos Gaufoi was erased in a single orbital bombardment, and to make their point clear, the Krillians also eradicated 3 additional human colonies nearby, leaving no survivors, no messages, only debris and ash. Earth was stunned. The governments of the world reeled in disbelief. What had once been a planet still, fractured by national borders and conflicting ideologies, suddenly found itself standing together, united not by ideology but by necessity. The United Earth Coalition was born out of that fire, a single front, formed to resist the annihilation they all now faced. The Krillians had centuries of military superiority. Their fleets dwarfed those of humanity. Their weapons were more precise, more destructive, and their tactics honed by generations of war. But humans had something else, something even the Krillians could not quantify: an unwillingness to die quietly. In those first years, humanity suffered defeat after defeat. Every engagement saw human ships outgunned and outmaneuvered. Their colonies fell one by one until only a core cluster remained, Earth-Mars, and a handful of orbital habitats in the Sol system clung desperately to life while the rest burned. It would have been easy to surrender, to accept terms, to become another client species in the Krillian hierarchy, but humanity had never followed the expected path. Instead, they adapted. They scavenged Krillian wreckage from border skirmishes and dissected every component down to the microcircuit. Their scientists worked tirelessly to bridge the technological gap, not by matching the Krillians blow for blow, but by understanding their principles and exploiting their weaknesses. This led to breakthroughs in energy shielding, propulsion, manipulation, and quantum communication. Every loss became a stepping stone, every retreat a lesson, and every dead soldier a reason to push forward. The conflict did more than unify Earth, it transformed it. The old rivalries between nations crumbled under the weight of a shared existential threat. Funding poured into research academies, military production skyrocketed, and recruitment reached unprecedented levels. Society reshaped itself into something new, something leaner, sharper, more focused. Humans became students of war, not because they loved it, but because they could not afford to fail. The war reached a brutal stalemate. The Krillians continued their advance, but at a slower pace. The humans now had countermeasures, strategies, and even occasional victories. Though small in scope, these successes were symbolic. They showed the galaxy that humanity was not so easily broken, that they would fight with whatever they had, with reckless ingenuity and relentless persistence. What the Krillians failed to understand was that their own success had made them complacent. Their doctrine had not evolved in centuries. Their war councils repeated the same strategies they had used on a dozen other species before, and when those strategies failed to crush humanity in the expected time frame, they reacted not with innovation but with more of the same overwhelming force and calculated precision. Humans, however, thrived in unpredictability. They shifted tactics from battle to battle, using deception, sabotage, and misdirection as often as firepower. They fought asymmetrically, targeting supply lines, communication nodes, and even attempting psychological operations using intercepted broadcasts and mimicked signals. The Krillians dismissed these efforts, at first calling them the antics of a desperate people. But slowly they began to notice their fleets had to stay on alert longer. Their supply chains grew thinner, their sensor grids more cluttered. It was not enough to turn the tide, but it signaled a change. The Krillians were no longer operating with absolute control, and for a species that had built its empire on the illusion of invulnerability, that was a dangerous crack in the foundation. Earth's engineers, working in underground bunkers and zero-gravity labs, started taking bigger risks. They combined captured Krillian tech with human intuition, creating hybrid systems that functioned not by perfect design but by adaptability, a core principle the Krillians never embraced. Ships began to emerge with dynamic armor, plating flexible energy cores and stealth systems that could momentarily phase in and out of local space readings. These developments did not come without cost. Each experiment required lives. Each test carried consequences, but humanity paid them because survival was non-negotiable. The Phantom was born from this crucible, a ship unlike anything before it, a gamble of engineering and desperation designed to slip past the barrier, not to engage the Krillians head-on, but to exploit their one blind spot, the belief that no enemy would ever reach them. The ship was constructed in orbit behind layers of deception. Even the name Phantom was a nod to its purpose to be unseen, unheard, untouchable. Only a handful knew of its mission. Fewer still knew its destination. The crew was handpicked not just for their skills, but for their resolve. Each of them understood that they might never return, but they boarded anyway because someone had to take the first step. Someone had to pierce the illusion of Krillian supremacy and show the galaxy that humanity was not prey. The war had pushed them to the edge. But the edge was where humans had always thrived, not in safety but in challenge, not in certainty but in the chaos of survival. And so the Phantom launched, cloaked in silence, cutting through space like a whispered threat, carrying with it the hopes of an entire species and the vengeance of every world that had burned. The Krillians had started a war. They believed they had already won, but they had underestimated what it meant to fight a cornered species, one that had tasted annihilation and refused to accept it, one that did not obey the rules, one that would either fall completely or change the rules of the galaxy forever. And that was the human factor, the wild card, the force the Krillians could not predict and now could no longer ignore. The Phantom was not humanity's strongest ship, nor its most heavily armed, but it was the most ambitious product of desperation and brilliance ever launched from Earth, conceived in secret, constructed under the highest security, and hidden even from most of the United Earth Fleet. It was the result of over a decade of obsessive research, reverse engineering, and ruthless trial and error. Its core purpose was not to win a battle, but to change the rules of war itself. While Earth had lost dozens of colonies and billions of lives to Krillian aggression, their scientists had gained something else, something far rarer than numbers or territory understanding. Every fragment of Krillian wreckage, every overheard transmission, every sliver of captured code had been turned into data and fed into a constantly evolving model of their enemy. From this came an idea, a ship not designed to fight, but to infiltrate, a ship that would turn the Krillians' own blind spots against them and strike where no weapon had ever reached the heart of the Empire. The Phantom was unlike any vessel built by humans before, sleek, matte black, and shaped to refract both light and gravimetric waves. Its form was as much science as art. Its hull was woven with layers of adaptive plating, capable of shifting its density to simulate different masses, while its quantum dampeners masked its energy signature, rendering it indistinguishable from background radiation to all known forms of Krillian detection. But the most advanced system on board was the phase shift array, a device capable of temporarily displacing the ship partially out of sync with normal space. Not quite invisible, not truly intangible, but just enough to slip through the teeth of even the most aggressive sensor grids. Its propulsion system was engineered for silence above all else. No contrails, no heat blooms, only a faint ripple in space-time that vanished behind it, like a ghost trail. It was humanity's scalpel, forged not to cleave fleets apart, but to make a single, precise incision into the spine of a monster. Its crew was handpicked, not for their combat prowess, but for their mental fortitude. Each one trained for high-pressure, zero-error missions. Each one fully aware that failure would mean not just death, but extinction. They were not heroes in the traditional sense. They were specialists, ghosts, before they even launched. Commander Maya Chen led them not by charisma, but by sheer competence, a former astrophysicist turned strategist. She had studied the barrier's architecture longer than anyone else on Earth, and she knew better than to believe it was perfect. It was powerful. Yes, elegant and efficient. Yes, but built on assumptions. Assumptions that no enemy could adapt fast enough to counter them. No enemy could penetrate undetected, and no enemy would dare try Maya's plan, relied on violating every one of those assumptions. The Phantom's mission was simple: to deliver a quantum virus into the core processor of the Krillian command network, a virus designed not to destroy, but to disrupt, to momentarily sever the lattice of communications and response timing that held the barrier together. Even a temporary lapse would be enough to allow the United Earth Fleet to breach the perimeter and establish a foothold in enemy space. The plan had no second phase, no extraction, no backup. It was all or nothing. The Phantom departed from a hidden orbital platform beyond the asteroid belt. Its launch unannounced, its trajectory known only to 5 individuals on Earth. Its first test was the minefield, a dense array of gravimetric mines suspended like deadly stars across the outermost layer of Krillian space. These devices detected any mass anomaly, any gravitational ripple larger than a speck of dust. But Maya had a countermeasure. The Phantom initiated a mass shift, recalibrating its gravitational footprint to read as less than a meteor fragment. It was a high-risk maneuver requiring flawless execution. Any deviation would detonate the field, but the crew performed it with machine-like precision, gliding through the mine layer like a whisper between thunder. The second challenge was the sensor web, a network of quantum detection satellites, each tuned to specific frequencies of electromagnetic distortion. The Phantom's phase shift array was activated, dropping the ship into a partially offset dimension where the rules of normal physics bent slightly enough to confuse the sensors. For 17 minutes, the ship was invisible, not just to eyes or heat maps, but to the very laws of spatial recognition. This window was just long enough to pass through the densest sensor zone and reach a point no human had ever seen, the inner ring where the automated weapons platforms resided. These were not drones or patrol ships. They were spaceborne fortresses, each equipped with beam weapons, pulse torpedoes, and micro-AI that operated independently and without mercy. No known stealth system had ever passed through them intact. The Phantom didn't try to hide. Instead, it moved slowly, methodically, propelled by minimal thrust engines and cloaked only by the deliberate randomness of its trajectory. It behaved like space debris, like drift, an object of no threat and no meaning. The weapons platforms ignored it as the crew held their breath for over 12 minutes. Finally, the last obstacle loomed, Keo's Prime itself and the orbital ring surrounding it, bristling with surveillance nodes and intercept cruisers. The Phantom slipped into a slingshot trajectory, using the planet's gravity to mask its acceleration. All systems remained silent. All lights dimmed as the ship's form became one with the void. And then, for the first time in history, a human vessel reached the edge of the Krillian homeworld undetected, untouched, and unnoticed. This moment was not marked by celebration or relief. There was only grim determination. The true mission had just begun, and failure now would not only mean death for the Phantom's crew, but the collapse of humanity's last hope in the war. Their ship was not built to fight prolonged battles. It was not meant to win glory. It was built to prove a point that the Krillians could be touched, that their empire was not invincible. And as the Phantom entered final approach, and the crew prepared to deliver the virus, there was no fear, only focus. Humanity had bet everything on one ship, one idea, and one shot, and now it was time to take it. Commander Maya Chen stood at the center of the Phantom's bridge, her gaze fixed on the ever-shifting tactical display before her, every movement calculated, every breath measured behind her. The crew maintained disciplined silence, each officer focused on their station, aware that even the smallest mistake could compromise the mission. They had trained for this moment for years, had lived under the weight of its enormity, and now, as the planet Keo's Prime loomed just beyond the outer rim of their sensors, they knew there would be no turning back. Their objective was the Central Command Station, a massive orbital facility in geosynchronous orbit around the Krillian homeworld. The station was more than just a nerve center. It was the mind of the barrier, the processor, through which data from every sensor platform, minefield, and interceptor passed. And if the Phantom could reach it, if they could deploy the quantum virus, humanity's fleet waiting in the shadows beyond the Krillian perimeter would have a window, a small, fragile opening in which they could strike. The final layer of defense stood between them and that chance. A formation of Krillian warships patrolling the inner sphere. Each vessel was enormous, bristling with energy cannons, point defense systems, and layered shielding. Maya studied their flight paths, their timing. The patterns were regular too. Regular, they weren't reacting to the Phantom because they hadn't detected it. Their formation suggested standard protocol, not a response to a known threat, but passing through them without altering course would bring the Phantom dangerously close to multiple scan zones. Deviating would waste time and increase the chance of being noticed. The decision was hers alone. Maintain course, she said, her voice calm and steady. Prepare all weapon systems. If they detect us, we fight. Her words triggered a ripple. of activity, the ship's energy readings shifted ever so slightly as systems moved from stealth power draw to combat readiness. Silently, the Phantom crept closer, threading the needle between giants. Then, without warning, a Krillian ship changed direction slightly. A scanning beam ignited and swept across space. The alarm blared not from a system fault, but from reality. They had been seen evasive maneuvers. Maya barked, but it was already too late. The scan caught them halfway through the field, and instantly the warships adjusted formation, closing in weapons, powering up stealth systems compromised. Hayes confirmed without hesitation. Maya made the call: disengage stealth, full power to shields, and weapons, open a channel to all Krillian ships. The crew looked at her, surprised not by the order, but by the boldness of it. Park opened the channel and Maya stood tall in the center of the bridge. "This is Commander Maya Chen of the human stellar ship. Phantom, your empire attacked our colonies without provocation and has waged a war of extinction against my species today. We bring the fight to your doorstep." She didn't expect a reply, and she didn't get one instead. Energy blasts surged from the enemy ships, striking the Phantom's forward shield. The vessel shuddered but held, reporting shield integrity. Hayes called out 87%. Maya nodded. They didn't expect resistance, not this close. Not here. Target the lead vessel's propulsion system. Fire when ready. The Phantom's main guns activated. Beams of precision energy lancing through the void and slamming into the Krillian flagship's engines, disabling its movement, but not destroying the vessel. Maya wasn't here to kill unnecessarily. She was here to complete a mission. The remaining Krillian ships adjusted quickly, shifting formation to encircle the Phantom, their tactics efficient but predictable evasive pattern. Delta, Maya ordered, hit their weapons arrays as the Phantom danced between arcs of enemy fire. Its maneuverability unmatched. The battle evolved with breathtaking speed with each pass. The Phantom unleashed controlled bursts aimed to degrade the offensive capacity of their enemies, but the Krillians responded with swarms of automated attack drones, hundreds of fast, small platforms designed to saturate a target through sheer volume point defense systems. Engage, Rodriguez called as the ship's smaller turrets came to life, tracking and eliminating incoming drones as fast as they could. The Phantom held its own, but Hayes spoke what? "They all knew we can't keep this up forever. More Krillian ships are converging." Maya knew the odds were worsening. The element of surprise had faded, and now they were surrounded by vessels. On home ground, set course for the Central Command Station. She said, "Max speed, we complete our mission, no matter the cost." The Phantom surged forward, taking direct hits with each kilometer. The shields flickered, the hull groaned, but still, it pushed forward, leaving behind the wreckage of Krillian vessels and stunned command crews who could not believe what they were seeing as they neared the station. Hayes turned to her. "Prepare the package for delivery." He said the final phase of their plan was at hand. The virus, a quantum code designed to infiltrate and collapse the synchronization of the barrier systems, had to be uploaded manually and from close range. Every second counted. Breaches reported on decks 3 and 4, Park said. "Force fields, holding but damage critical." "How long until we're in position?" Maya asked. 2 minutes 17 seconds. Rodriguez replied, her hands flying over navigation. Maya took a deep breath. The Phantom had made it farther than anyone expected, and now they were within striking distance, but they wouldn't make it intact. More enemy ships were arriving, forming a sphere of crossfire and tightening the net initiate protocol. "Omega," she said. Hayes turned to her sharply. "We're not in position yet. We won't get any closer in one piece," she answered. "Execute the protocol." He nodded and activated the sequence across the hull of the Phantom. Plates began to shift, seams opened and retracted, and the ship began to transform in seconds. It disassembled itself, not in destruction but in design, splitting into hundreds of smaller vessels, each one housing a fragment of the crew and a shard of the virus. It was the Phantom's final form, its greatest secret, a modular fleet disguised as a single craft. Now scattered like stars, each ship accelerated toward a different node in the Krillian network, overwhelming sensors and forcing the enemy to split its attention. Maya's ship headed straight for the command hub, dodging fire and flying with pinpoint precision. This was the moment their mission lived or died, and no matter what came next, the Krillian Empire would never forget it, because now they knew humanity could reach them and nothing would ever be the same again. The Phantom raced forward through the chaos, its modular pieces scattering across the battlefield like shrapnel made of purpose, each vessel independently controlled, each one carrying a sliver of the original crew and a fragment of the quantum virus. The Krillians were completely unprepared for what they were seeing. Sensors struggled to track the sudden swarm of targets, and targeting systems designed for large capital ships flailed helplessly, trying to lock onto the smaller, faster intruders. Alarms rang throughout the Krillian Central Command Station as the once unified shape of the Phantom became hundreds of coordinated threats, overwhelming the defenses that had for centuries been thought unbreakable. Grand Admiral Vexter watched in disbelief from the command chamber, his six-fingered hands clenched against the rail as his analysts scrambled to make sense of what was happening. What trickery is this, he demanded, but no one had answers. The human vessel had not been destroyed. It had not even been disabled. It had evolved right before their eyes. From a single ship into an armada of micro-vessels, each one precise, lethal, and unpredictable on the bridge of her personal module. Commander Maya Chen stayed calm as her vessel twisted and turned through fire. The station loomed ahead, bristling with weaponry, but its targeting systems were still focused on large targets, and the new human swarm didn't give them time to adapt. Incoming interceptor. Hayes warned. Maya kept her eyes forward. Stay the course, prepare, full weapons release. As the Krillian interceptor came into view, Maya's module opened fire not to destroy, but to disrupt the larger ship's systems. Long enough to slip past the temporary confusion was all they needed. Shields flickering, damage warnings screaming. The module made it through. We're in position. Hayes confirmed. Maya's voice was quiet and firm. Upload the virus. Hayes hit the command, and the payload transmitted a stream of quantum code designed to interface directly with the control systems of the barrier, not to destroy, but to desynchronize it. The virus had been crafted from Krillian principles altered by human understanding. It spread like wildfire from node to node, each transmission disrupting the harmony of the whole across the battlefield. Other modules were doing the same, each one a spark, each node a fuse. Within moments, systems began to fail across the entire defense network. Energy weapon batteries went dark, sensor feedback became static, automated turrets locked onto false targets as the barrier, the legendary shield that had protected the Krillian Empire for centuries, began to collapse. Technicians aboard the station shouted warnings, trying to regain control, but it was too late. From the edge of the system, gravitational distortions appeared as the waiting United Earth fleet surged forward at full speed. Dreadnoughts, cruisers, and support craft entered Krillian space for the first time in history, their formation tight, their mission clear. On board the HS Defiance, Admiral Helena Winters stood at the helm, receiving confirmation from dozens of modules that the breach was successful. The barrier is down, tactical confirmed, and our teams have struck key defense nodes. Winters gave a single nod. Send the message. The message, transmitted on all frequencies in the Krillian language, offered a choice: immediate ceasefire and recognition of human territorial sovereignty, or continued war now fought on Krillian soil. It was not a threat, but a statement, a fact born of action. Back on the command station, Vexter heard the message, his scales pulsing with rage. He wanted to order. a counterattack to rally every remaining ship and drive the invaders out. But the data on his screens painted a different truth. Half his fleet disabled countless platforms corrupted by enemy code, and the human vessels still moving, still advancing. Not toward cities, not toward civilians, but military targets. Only Zyla, his senior tactician, leaned in. "Grand Admiral, we must consider their offer. They came to fight." "Yes, but they show restraint. They seek terms. Not conquest. We would not have done the same." Vextor's pride warred with his logic for centuries. His people had ruled unchallenged, but now their defenses had been pierced not by overwhelming force, but by cleverness, by audacity, by humans, and their refusal to play by the rules aboard her module. Maya Chen saw the transmission light change. The Krillians were responding. Hayes glanced at her. "Admiral Winters is requesting your presence aboard the Defiance." Maya gave a tired nod. "Then let's finish what we started." The module linked with the Defiance, docking as the rest of the surviving microvessels regrouped out of the original 378 ships. Only 214 remained, the others destroyed. Lost in the approach, in the swarm, in the fire that followed, each one a sacrifice to make this moment possible. Maya walked into the Grand Council chamber beside Admiral Winters as the Krillian delegation entered Vextor. At their head, subdued his scales, a muted shade of blue, the color of reluctant acceptance. "You have achieved what we believed impossible," he said, looking directly at her. "Your species has earned our attention, if not yet our respect." Winters stepped forward, her voice steady. "Humanity never sought war. Grand Admiral, we sought only space to grow, to exist. But we will never kneel. We have proven that." Vextor said nothing for a moment, then slowly nodded. "Let us discuss terms," and with that, the impossible became real for the first time. The Krillian Empire sat at the negotiating table, not as rulers, not as conquerors, but as equals, and as Maya looked around that chamber, she knew they had changed the course of history, not with domination, but with determination, not with numbers, but with will, and in doing so they had sent a message to the galaxy: humanity was here, and they would not be ignored ever again. Grand Admiral Vextor stood rigid in the command center of the Krillian Central Station as reports flooded in from every deck, every system and every ship in orbit. What had once been absolute control had dissolved into disorder as the Phantom's modular assault overwhelmed centuries of static defense protocol. Nothing in Krillian history had prepared them for this, not because the humans were more advanced or more numerous, but because they were utterly unpredictable. The swarm of micro-vessels born from what had been a single ship had broken every tactical expectation the Empire held. Vextor had seen wars, entire civilizations fall, entire systems burn, but he had never seen chaos like this. The humans were not attacking with brute force. They were targeting weakness. They were disrupting systems, misdirecting weapons, creating confusion, while never striking civilian targets. They moved with purpose and restraint traits that the Krillians had never imagined this primitive species could possess. Vextor's scales shifted through a spectrum of alarmed colors, his mind racing as he shouted orders that were outdated the moment they left his mouth. Their fleet formations had been built to repel invasions, not internal sabotage, and now the enemy was not outside the perimeter, but inside the walls. And multiplying tactician, Zila relayed another report. "The barrier is collapsing. Command coordination is offline. Our targeting grids are fragmenting, and automated defense systems are conflicting with each other." Vextor gritted his teeth, then shouted, "Redirect all remaining vessels to defend the central station. We cannot let them reach the core module." Zila hesitated. "Sir, the enemy vessels are already within the perimeter. Multiple nodes are compromised, and the virus is continuing to spread. Our systems cannot purge it fast enough to contain the breach. It's not a full-scale attack, It's a systemic takedown from within. Vextor realized the terrifying truth. The humans had not come to win a fleet battle. They had come to dismantle the Empire's most sacred defense. By the time the full fleet could mobilize, the core would already be compromised outside the station. The human micro-vessels continued their mission. Some were shot down, many took damage, but they kept moving, slipping through tiny gaps in the defense grid, striking precise points, disabling critical systems. It was a war of inches, a war of milliseconds, a war of minds. And the Krillians were losing. Maya Chen piloted her command module toward the data hub, her eyes tracking power fluctuations as she dodged fire and debris. She could hear her ship's hull groaning under the pressure, but she didn't slow down. This was the moment everything depended on. 30 seconds until optimal position, Hayes reported. Maya adjusted their angle and focused upload trigger armed standing by. Hayes said she gave a single nod. No speeches, no second guesses, just execution as they entered the proper range. The command was given. The virus shard beamed into the primary Krillian core, joining the other fragments already infecting the network. Within seconds, the entire system stuttered across the Empire. Alarms blared, defense platforms powered down, targeting systems. Crashed command relays, desynced Krillian warships turned to see a nightmare unfold. Not from outside their borders, but inside their most guarded sanctuary. The illusion of control shattered with it. So too did their confidence. The once silent edge of the Krillian Empire erupted with human ships emerging from hyperspace. The United Earth Fleet, led by Admiral Helena Winters, surged forward, now unobstructed by the once impenetrable barrier, the Defiance, and dozens of capital ships cut through space. Toward Keo's Prime, the mission was no longer about survival. It was about presence. It was about showing the Krillians that humanity would not vanish into the void they had endured. They had adapted, and now they had arrived. Admiral Winters ordered transmissions in all known Krillian dialects. "This is not a conquest," she declared, over every frequency. "This is a reckoning. Your aggression has brought us here. Your assumptions have doomed you, but we will give you what you never gave us a choice: surrender. Cease fire or face extinction." Back in the command center, Vextor trembled with fury, but beneath it was something far worse than anger. Doubt. For the first time in his decorated career, he doubted his empire's supremacy. They had failed to imagine that a younger, less refined species could outmaneuver them, that innovation could come from desperation, that discipline could lose to chaos. He looked at Zila, who met his gaze with a calmness that unnerved him. "They have not struck our civilians," she said. Softly, "they have hit only our weapons. Only our pride. If they wanted destruction, they could have taken it." Vextor turned away, saying nothing, his voice lost among the static and confusion. In his silence, the decision was made. The humans had not come to destroy. They had come to prove that they belonged. They had shattered not only the barrier, but the arrogance it stood upon. And as the tactical maps continued to blink red and the last automated guns fell silent, one fact stood above all others: the Krillian Empire had been touched. It had been broken not by greater force, but by greater will, and it would never be the same again. So, as the virus spread through the Krillian defense network, chaos ignited across every level of their meticulously controlled system. Defense grids blinked in and out, targeting nodes froze, then reset only to target their own patrol ships, and the once impenetrable barrier that had shielded the Empire for centuries collapsed in a wave of cascading system failures from the bridge of the HS Defiance. Admiral Helena Winters watched the moment unfold with quiet intensity. Behind her, officers reported data in clipped, urgent tones, relaying one confirmation after another. "The barrier is down. Multiple control hubs offline, fleet mobility compromised." And then the message they had all been waiting for: the path to Keo's Prime is open. The Admiral gave the order to advance. and the United Earth Fleet surged forward through the newly opened corridor of space, the massive dreadnoughts at the vanguard, followed by agile destroyers and support ships. Humanity had waited years for this window, a breach so narrow, so improbable, that many believed it would never come. But now that it had, every vessel moved with unrelenting precision. They were not there to burn. They were not there to conquer. They were there to deliver a statement that no power, no empire that built its strength on fear and isolation could remain unchallenged forever. As the fleet closed in on the Krillian homeworld transmissions broadcast on every known frequency. This is Admiral Helena Winters of the United Earth Fleet. Your defenses have failed. Your central systems are compromised. We do not come for vengeance. We come for peace. But we will not be ignored. We offer terms. Cease hostilities. Recognize our right to exist. Or face a war you can no longer contain within the Krillian Central Command Station. Grand Admiral Vextor heard the words as they echoed through his chamber, the voice of a human not trembling, not pleading, but firm and measured for generations. The Krillian Empire had dealt with younger civilizations through overwhelming shows of force. They would crush one colony and the rest would submit, but this time had been different. The humans had not crumbled, they had adapted, and now they stood at the edge of the empire, not asking for mercy, but offering a choice. And Vextor realized with growing dread that the situation was no longer under his control. His fleet was scattered, his defense platforms silenced, and his tactical network flooded with a foreign code they could not purge. Technicians shouted from their stations. Multiple ships disabled home defense fleet. At 50% capacity, planetary interceptors offline. The Admiral's scales darkened with rage and disbelief. How could this be happening? How could primitives only a century into spaceflight have brought the Empire to its knees beside him? Zila, his senior strategist, stepped forward studying the live data feed. They have struck with intent, not recklessness, she said calmly. They spared our cities, targeted only military infrastructure. Their message is clear. They want an end, not annihilation. Vextor turned toward her. You suggest surrender, I suggest clarity, she replied softly. We have no remaining strategic advantage. Further resistance would devastate our infrastructure and risk civilian panic. They are not here to enslave us. They are forcing us to see them as equals. Her words hung in the air, and for the first time Vextor did not refute them. He had seen the recordings, the Phantom splitting into a modular swarm. Each vessel precise and focused, the fleet that emerged afterward, showing no signs of waste or brutality. The humans had fought not as conquerors but as survivors, and now they stood on the edge of victory, not by sheer strength but by breaking the Krillian assumption that fear was control. Vextor's pride battled with reality, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then finally, send word to the human flagship. We will discuss terms aboard the HS Defiance. The bridge crew fell silent as the Krillian response arrived. The channel was open, the language clear. They would negotiate. Maya Chen, now aboard the Defiance, watched the moment from the side of the main conference room. Her face calm, but her hands still marked by the strain of battle behind her. The crew of the Phantom, those who survived, had assembled quietly, each one carrying the memory of those who had fallen to bring them here too. 114 of the original 378 modules had made it back. The others lost in the swarm, in the fight, in the sacrifice that cracked open the door to this room. When the Krillian delegation arrived, led by Vextor and Zila, they walked not with arrogance, but with understanding, their posture still proud, but their eyes cautious. Vextor's scales glimmered in a neutral tone, the color of controlled concession. He looked at Maya and gave a slight nod. Your people have forced a conversation we never expected, he said. Maya replied evenly, we never wanted war, we only wanted to survive. Vextor said nothing more, only gestured for the negotiations to begin, and so they did, no longer defined by weapons, but by words. Each phrase a battle, each clause a concession, and throughout it all Maya remained still, watching, listening, knowing that even in this chamber the mission was not over, because peace was not given, it was forged. And this peace, if it held, would reshape the stars forever. What had begun as a desperate attempt to survive had become something greater, a declaration that humanity was here and would no longer be written out of galactic history. The Krillian Empire had fallen not to destruction, but to evolution, and Maya knew as she stepped forward to speak again that this was only the beginning. Maya Chen stood silently near the observation deck of the HS Defiance, watching the flickering outline of Keo's Prime through the reinforced glass. The once untouchable Krillian homeworld now lay exposed within striking distance of the full United Earth fleet. Yet there were no barrages, no planetary assaults, no weapons targeting civilian structures. Instead, there was only quiet, poised tension and the hum of a fleet that had come not to conquer but to prove a point around her. The bridge officers moved with careful purpose, their screens glowing with data, their voices low but focused. Every few minutes, another message was received, another Krillian installation confirmed as neutralized or surrendered, but the commands from Admiral Winters remained unchanged. Hold position, maintain discipline, do not engage, unless fired upon. The Phantom's mission had been a success, beyond any expectation, not just tactically but strategically. The Krillians had expected brutality, retaliation, a species beaten back into a corner, suddenly unleashed to tear through the empire that had nearly wiped them out. But humanity had delivered something different. The strike had been surgical, devastating only military nodes, leaving cities untouched, communications open, and options clear. The message was not one of revenge. It was a statement: we could destroy you, but we choose not to. This restraint stunned the Krillian High Command even more than the breach itself, and it forced them to rethink everything they believed about humans. Vextor, the once boastful Grand Admiral, now walked through his command halls with his scales dulled and his tone muted, surrounded by officers who no longer asked how, but why. How had this happened? Why had their empire failed to anticipate the strength of a younger species? And more pressingly, what would come next? Negotiations had begun, and though progress was slow, the very fact that the Krillians had agreed to speak was a victory in itself. For centuries, their empire had never negotiated from weakness. Now they sat across from the same species they once considered irrelevant, and listened not because they respected them, but because they had no other choice. Maya had been invited to sit in on the talks, not as a representative, but as a witness to what her crew had made possible. Her presence alone served as a reminder of the cost of underestimation. 214 of the Phantom's modules had returned intact, and each survivor carried the weight of those who did not. They had been the tip of the spear, the blade that cut the first wound and opened the way for diplomacy. And now, with the galaxy watching, humanity held the initiative, not through dominance but through balance. As Admiral Winters presented terms, she made no demands of tribute, no call for Krillian subjugation, only acknowledgement, recognition of human sovereignty, of their right to expand and live without fear or interference. It was not a conqueror's speech. It was a builder's one, and it made the Krillian delegation pause, not because it was weak, but because it reflected a strength they had never seen, a strength of restraint. Vextor's eyes narrowed as he listened, and finally he spoke. "Your people did not strike our civilians, even when you could, even when it would have been easy." "Why?" Maya answered evenly. "Because we are not you." The words held no malice, only clarity. "We are capable of vengeance, but we are built for something else. We do not seek to rule, we seek to endure, we seek to grow." Vextor studied her as if trying to find a lie in her posture, but there was none. Maya had no interest in humiliation or superiority. She had already won the only victory that mattered making. The Krillians see her species as more than a problem, more than a mistake. They were now a presence, a force in the galaxy to be considered, if not yet embraced. The talks continued for hours, then days, and eventually the framework of an agreement began to form. The Krillian Empire would withdraw from former human colonies, recognize United Earth's territorial boundaries, and engage in further talks regarding trade technology and non-aggression. The Phantom Strike would remain a classified detail to most of the galaxy, but among those who mattered, it would become legend, a single mission that turned the course of an empire and redefined what it meant to be human. Maya stood once more on the deck watching as Krillian warships slowly powered down, as human ships took up protective orbit, not to dominate but to secure the peace she had helped make real. She thought of those who had fallen, those whose names would be etched into the walls of Earth's memorial halls, and knew it had not been in vain. Krillians would remember this moment not as a defeat, but as a reckoning, and perhaps in time, even as a beginning of something new. As she turned to leave the deck, her calm pinged Admiral Winters was requesting her presence. The final agreement was ready to be signed, and Maya Chen, who had once stood in the dark, quiet bridge of a ghost ship, now walked into the light of a future she had helped carve with silent strategy and the audacity to believe that survival was not enough, that dignity and peace could be won, not with fire but with purpose. The Krillian Empire had not been defeated by destruction. It had been humbled by humanity, and in that humility lay the seeds of lasting change. The conference room aboard the HS Defiance was quiet, save for the low hum of ventilation and the soft clicks of datapads being reviewed. The Krillian delegation sat across from the human leadership, their postures rigid but not hostile, their eyes alert but not aggressive. Grand Admiral Vextor, flanked by Senior Strategist Zila, remained composed, though his expression betrayed a storm of conflicting thoughts. The scales along his neck shimmered faintly in a subdued shade of gray, a color that among his kind reflected caution and reluctant respect. Maya Chen sat at the side of the chamber, not speaking. Only observing her presence was not ceremonial. It was a statement. She represented not just the Phantom or its fallen modules, but the very spirit that had brought humanity to this room. The talks began with formality titles exchanged, acknowledgments made. Then Admiral Helena Winters addressed the core matter of the meeting, the recognition of United Earth's sovereignty and the immediate cessation of hostilities. Her words were direct, firm, and unapologetic, but not vindictive. She detailed the sequence of Krillian strikes that had sparked the war, the loss of human lives and settlements, and the years of struggle that had followed. Yet she made no demands for reparations, no threats of further escalation. Instead, she offered a path forward, a mutual coexistence grounded not in alliance but in distance and understanding. The Krillian delegation listened in silence, taking in each word with the gravity it deserved. They had expected ultimatums instead. They found proposals they had prepared for condemnation, but were given choice. Vextor leaned forward and asked why, after all this, after your success, why do you not demand more? Maya answered before Winters could. Because we never wanted more, she said. We wanted room to live and be left alone. You mistook our patience for weakness and our silence for fear. That was your error, not ours. Vextor nodded slowly, his gaze resting on Maya longer than necessary, as if weighing her soul against the strategy that had brought his empire to its knees. Zila interjected, your actions were precise, efficient. We underestimated your species because we assumed you would act as we would with dominance. You chose another path. That fact alone changes our understanding. Admiral Winters offered a faint nod. "We learned from you," she said. "We studied you for years, and we realized your strength was not invincibility. It was predictability, and that became your greatest weakness." Zila processed the words without protest and began drafting language for a preliminary agreement. The terms were simple but powerful: mutual recognition of territorial borders, an end to offensive engagements, the establishment of a neutral buffer zone, and the opening of an ongoing communication channel to prevent future conflict. Each clause was a quiet revolution, a chisel tapping against centuries of Krillian cultural rigidity. Maya watched it unfold with a strange calm. Part of her wanted to feel triumph, to bask in the validation of a mission completed, but another part only felt the weight of it all. The names of her crew, the hours in stealth, the silent approach, the final transformation of the Phantom into a scattered swarm. Each loss had carved a scar, and victory did not erase them. Vextor's final comment before the agreement was digitally signed held more meaning than Maya expected. "You have earned our attention," he said, "and though we may never see your species as we see ourselves, we will no longer see you as lesser." In Krillian speech, it was not flattery. It was a fundamental shift in status, and though subtle, it was the highest acknowledgement their culture allowed. The agreement was signed and archived, the transmission sent across the United Earth Fleet and relayed to Earth. Itself, the war was over, or at least paused, perhaps forever, perhaps not, but the silence that followed felt different. It felt earned later as Maya stood once more near the viewport, watching the Krillian ships disengage and return to orbit around their homeworld. She felt the enormity of it all, not as a soldier or as a commander, but as a human. She had not set out to make peace, she had set out to finish a mission, and yet peace had emerged from the ashes of that mission. Not because of force, but because of choice. And that was what the Krillians had never understood. Until now, they had mistaken restraint for inability and patience for weakness. But humans had waited, watched, endured, and then acted with precision and purpose. In doing so, they had proven that survival was not their only strength. Their true power lay in adaptability, in their refusal to follow the scripts written for them by older empires, and in their courage to rewrite their own future now as the Defiance prepared to depart. Maya took a final look at the world they had once believed unreachable, the empire they had once feared invincible, and she understood that the war was not won by ships or viruses or fleets. It was won in the minds of those who had finally been forced to see humanity for what it truly was. Not a lesser race, not a mistake, not a child among giants, but an equal born, not of power, but of will, and that would echo through the stars long after the Phantom had faded into history, as the last signatures were digitally confirmed, and the diplomatic agreement was archived into both Krillian and United Earth systems. A strange quiet settled over the command deck of the HS Defiance. It was not the silence of tension nor the pause before another attack, but something deeper, more reflective. The kind of silence that followed the end of something immense and irreversible. Maya Chen stood once again before the main viewport, watching the Krillian homeworld shrink in the distance as the human fleet began its slow turn away. The war was over. Not in the traditional sense of absolute surrender or crushed resistance, but in the sense that both sides had seen enough. Both had been changed in ways they could no longer deny. The Krillian Empire that once proclaimed its eternal dominance had been breached not by superior firepower, but by an idea, an execution of strategy and daring that defied every assumption they had held about younger species, about humanity, about the very nature of control. For centuries they believed themselves immune to challenge because no one had ever made it through the barrier. But humanity had done more than breach their defenses. They had exposed the limits of a system built on arrogance and repetition. Maya thought back to the early days of the war, to the first reports of colonies destroyed, the chaos of unprepared retaliation, and the slow realization that humanity would need to transform itself or perish and transform. They did not by matching Krillian firepower, but by reinventing what warfare even meant. The Phantom had been that reinvention, a ghost ship, a symbol of quiet rebellion against inevitability. Its final act not of destruction but of disruption. It did not flatten cities or turn fleets to dust. It sowed doubt in an empire that had never questioned its superiority. It sparked negotiation in a species that had never once spoken from anything other than a position of power. And that was where the real victory lay. Not in territory gained or enemies lost, but in a shift of thought, in a redefinition of possibility. Maya walked the quiet halls of the ship, passing crew members who nodded silently, each face marked with the same exhaustion and reflection that she carried. They had been to the edge and come back changed. Not because they had won, but because they had revealed something no weapon could. The truth that strength without vision breeds stagnation, and that tradition without challenge becomes weakness in disguise. As she entered the mission archive room, she placed a sealed drive into the ship's log containing every detail of the Phantom's journey, not just for history, but for those who would follow, those who would someday look back and ask how humanity survived, how they stood against something so vast and endured, not through overwhelming force, but through resolve, ingenuity, and unity. Far below her on Earth, people were just beginning to hear the news, some with relief, some with disbelief, some with grief for those lost, but all of them connected by a moment that would ripple through generations and reshape the way they saw themselves in the cosmos, in classrooms and briefing rooms, in war colleges and diplomatic academies. The story of the Phantom would be studied not as a tale of domination, but as a lesson in the power of unexpected thinking and precise action. And more than anything, it would become a warning to every great power that believed itself untouchable, that believed its walls were unbreakable, because history does not favor the impenetrable, it favors the adaptable. Back on the bridge, Admiral Winters joined Maya, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she spoke softly. "We did something most thought was impossible. We changed the narrative." Maya nodded. "Yes, and we did it without becoming the thing we were fighting against." Winters gave her a long look, then smiled. "You ready to go home?" Maya glanced once more at the stars, at the Empire, now forced to see them differently, at the quiet pride of her crew, then turned and said, "Yes, but we don't go back the same. We go back knowing who we are, what we're capable of, and that we earned our place out here." The Defiance shifted course, joining the rest of the fleet as it made the long journey back to human space, and in its wake it left more than a treaty. It left a message that echoed quietly across the stars, that in the face of fear and fury, humanity did not choose destruction. They chose to endure, to innovate, and to speak not with louder weapons, but with louder purpose. In the end, it was not power that won the war. It was identity, and that was a lesson no empire could afford to forget.